The invisible girl in the crowd, she walked down the busy street, yet no one seemed to notice her. The market stalls were full of noise, people laughing, calling out prices, children running between their parents, but she was just another shadow. Passing by every morning was the same, a silent walk to school, eyes fixed on the ground, hands clutching the straps of her worn-out bag. It wasn't that people disliked her. It was worse than that, they simply didn't see her. At school, she slipped through the hallways like a ghost. The chatter of classmates never stopped for her. The circle of friends at lunch never opened a space. She sat at the end of the bench, quietly eating her sandwich while everyone else talked and laughed. Her name was called during roll call, but it was always mumbled quickly. It's like just another box to tick. She wasn't loud, she wasn't fashionable. She didn't have the latest phone or the kind of charm that made people turn their heads, but what she did have was a secret, something she had never shown to anyone. At night, in her small room, when the world outside went quiet, she would take out her second-hand guitar. It had scratches on the wood and one string that had been replaced more times than she could remember, but it was her treasure. She would sit by the window, strumming softly, letting the music fill the empty space around her. Music was her world. It was the only place where she didn't feel invisible. Her voice, soft and warm, would rise and fall with the melody. Sometimes she would close her eyes and imagine a crowd listening, holding on to every word she sang. But when the song ended, she would open her eyes and see only the same four walls. Her parents were kind but busy. Her father worked long shifts. Her mother took care of her younger siblings. There was never much time to sit and talk. They loved her in their own way, but they had no idea that the quietest girl in there. Home carried music in her heart like a burning flame. At school, teachers saw her as average, not the kind of student who stood out. Her grades were fine, her behavior polite. She was the kind of person you could walk past every day and never truly remember. Sometimes, when she sat alone at the back of the classroom, she would watch others with a kind of quiet curiosity. There were kids who could make the whole class laugh with just one joke. Others could speak with confidence, raise their hands for every question, and walk into any group without hesitation. She wondered what it would feel like to be noticed. Like that, she wondered if anyone had ever been curious about her. The way she was about them. One afternoon as she walked home, she passed a group of older students sitting on the school steps. One of them was playing a guitar, strumming loud, messy chords while the others laughed and clapped along. She slowed down almost without thinking, listening to the sound. The player wasn't even very good, but still people were watching him, smiling, talking to him like he mattered. For a moment, she imagined herself in his place. Her fingers on the strings, her voice carrying through the air, the thought made. Her heart beat faster, but then she quickly shook it away. That wasn't her world, she was just the invisible girl in the crowd. That night after homework, she took out her guitar again. This time, she played one of the songs she had written herself. The words told a story of feeling unseen, of wanting to be more than just a shadow. Her voice trembled at first, but as she sang the chorus, it grew stronger. If anyone had heard her in that moment, they would have stopped in their tracks. But no one did. The only witness was the moonlight spilling through her window. She set the guitar down and sat in silence for a while. Somewhere deep inside, thought began to grow small, but impossible to ignore. What if one day someone did hear her? What if the world finally turned its head and saw her? Not as another face in the crowd, but as someone worth remembering. Little did she know, that day was coming sooner than she could imagine. A voice hidden from the world, Evan, in her quiet life. Music was the one thing that truly belonged to her. Every evening, when the street outside grew silent and her family was busy with their own routines, she would close the door to her small room and open her old guitar case. The smell of the wood, the feel of the strings beneath her fingertips, it was the only thing that made her feel alive. Her songs weren't written to impress anyone. They were her diary. Her way of telling the truth without speaking it out loud. Some nights, she would write about her loneliness. Other nights, about the dreams she never dared to chase. The notebook on her desk was full of lyrics, messy scribbles, and words scratched out and rewritten until they finally sounded right. Each song was a piece of her heart, but no one had ever heard them. She had never been the type to post videos online. She didn't take selfies or record herself singing. The idea of strangers hearing her voice terrified her. She had seen how cruel people could be with their words, how quickly they could turn something beautiful into a joke. So she kept it all locked away, hidden from the world at school. Music class was the only place she felt a little more alive, but even there she kept her voice low when the teacher asked the class to sing together. She blended her voice so well that no one could pick it out, and yet when she sang alone at home, her voice could fill the entire room with warmth. One afternoon, something happened that stayed in her mind for days. She was walking past the gym after classes had ended when she heard the faint sound of a piano. Curious, she peeked inside and saw an older student playing confidently, without fear, while two others sat nearby, listening. Their faces were lit up with admiration. She stood there in the shadows, wondering what it would feel like to share something so openly. Her fingers itched to strum her guitar, to let her own voice out, but she turned away before anyone could see her at home. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Why was it so easy for others to share their talents while she stayed hidden? She knew the answer. It was fear. Fear that people wouldn't care. Fear that they would hear her and still look past her like they always had. Her best friend, if she could be called that, was an old cassette player her father had found at a flea market. It was scratched and missing one button, but it still worked, sometimes. She would record herself singing just to hear what she sounded like from the outside. The first time she did it, she was shocked. Her voice sounded different, richer, fuller than she expected, but still, she kept the tapes hidden in a box under her bed. There were moments when she wanted to believe that her music could mean something to someone. She would imagine playing at a cafe, her voice rising above the quiet hum of conversation. She would imagine people pausing, listening, maybe even smiling, but then reality would return. And she'd remind herself that things like that didn't happen to girls like her. One evening, as she sat by her window strumming a new melody, a sudden knock came at her door. She froze. Her younger brother poked his head in, eyes curious. "Was that you playing?" It sounded nice. She didn't know what to say. He had never shown interest in her music before. Before she could answer, he shrugged and left. It was such a small moment, but it stayed with her if even he had noticed. There was something worth sharing. Days later, a notice appeared on the school board, annual talent show. Sign up now. She stood there staring at it. Her heart told her to walk away, but another part of her whispered that this could be her chance. She imagined herself on stage, the lights warm on her face, the crowd listening, and then she imagined herself frozen. In fear, unable to sing a single note, the thought made her stomach twist. That night, she sat in her room, the paper notice folded in her pocket. She strummed her guitar slowly, each note ringing clear in the quiet. She thought about the years she had spent invisible. She thought about the songs that had lived and died in her room. She thought about the possibility, just the possibility that one performance could change everything. But fear still held her back. She placed the guitar back in its case, telling herself it wasn't the right time. And yet, even as she turned off the light and lay in bed, her mind kept replaying the same thought. What if the right time never came? Little did she know, the decision she was avoiding was already finding its way to her. And soon, she would no longer have the choice to stay hidden. The day everything changed was a Tuesday morning. It's a kind of morning that felt ordinary in every way. The sky was cloudy but calm. The air cool enough to carry the smell of fresh bread from the bakery across the street. She walked into school, expecting another day of classes, another day of blending into the background. But that day, something unexpected happened during the first break. A group of students crowded around the notice board near the cafeteria. She didn't pay much attention until she heard bits of conversation. Talent shows next Friday? Big stage this year. They're even inviting parents and local guests. Her stomach gave a small twist. She had heard about the talent show before, but she had always ignored it. This time, though, the whispers around her made it impossible to push away. Later in math class, the teacher made an announcement. All of you, listen up. An annual talent show is your chance to share something you're proud of. Don't be shy. Even if you think no one will care, sometimes. The quietest person surprises the world. The words hit her harder than she expected. It was almost as if the teacher had looked right at her when she said it, but of course, she didn't. Nobody ever did after school. She tried to leave quickly. But her path was blocked by one of the volunteers handing out sign-up sheets. "You should join," the girl said, with a friendly smile. Her first instinct was to refuse. "I don't think so," she muttered, taking a step back. But the volunteer didn't give up. "Even if you don't win, it's fun, you meet people, you show them something new. Besides, you never know who might remember it." The word stuck with her as she walked home, the folded paper clutched in her hand. At home. She placed the sign-up sheet on her desk. She stared at it for a long time. It was such a simple decision. Fill it out or throw it away, but for her, it felt like choosing between staying invisible forever or stepping into the light, she thought. About the songs she had written, the ones that no one had heard. She thought about the old guitar waiting in the corner. And she thought about what it would feel like if, just once, people actually stopped to listen that night. She didn't pick up the guitar right away. She sat on her bed, knees pulled up, staring at the moon through the window. Her mind was a storm of what ifs. What if she forgot the lyrics? What if her voice cracked? What if the audience laughed? But another thought pushed through, quiet but steady. What if they didn't laugh? What if they loved it? She finally reached for her guitar and began to play. The song she chose was one she had never shared with anyone. It was about feeling invisible, about longing to be seen. The melody was soft but powerful, carrying the weight of everything she had kept locked inside. Halfway through, she felt something in her shift. It was as if the song was speaking for her, telling her that hiding forever was no longer enough. The next day at school, she carried the sign-up sheet in her bag. Her hands were sweaty. Her heart raced every time she thought about handing it in. She almost threw it away twice, but when the final bell rang, she found herself standing in front of the volunteer from the day before. "Here," she said quietly, placing the paper on the desk. The volunteer smiled. "I'm glad you decided to join." For the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of excitement. That evening, she told herself it was just a small school event. But deep down, she knew this was more than that. This was her chance to step out of the shadows she had lived in for so long. She spent the next few days practicing in her room. Her voice grew stronger with each attempt, her fingers more confident on the strings. Still, she told no one, not her parents, not even her younger brother. She wanted it to be a surprise. Or maybe she was afraid that telling someone would make it real, and real things could fail. The night before the talent show, she barely slept. Her guitar was polished, strings tuned perfectly. She laid out her clothes, a simple dress she had worn only once. Before Anne tried to imagine herself standing on the stage, she could almost hear the sound of applause in her head. But she could also hear the deafening silence that might follow if things went wrong. The morning of the show arrived. Her hands trembled as she carried her guitar case to school. Students were buzzing with energy, talking about their acts, dancers, magicians, comedians, singers with backup tracks. She didn't tell anyone what her act was. She just sat quietly, waiting for her turn. And when her name was finally called, she took a deep breath. The stage lights were bright and warm against her skin. She could see the faint outlines of the crowd. For a moment, she felt like running, but then her fingers touched the strings, and the first note rang out clear and steady. It was in that moment, as the room began to fall silent, that she realized this was the day everything was going to change. Fear on the stage. The stage was bigger than she expected. From the seats, it had always looked small, just a wooden platform with a curtain. But standing there, under the bright heat of the lights, it felt like an ocean. Her legs felt heavy, her palms slick with sweat. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the lights, hundreds of eyes were watching. She could feel their weight even though she couldn't see their faces clearly. She shifted her guitar strap on her shoulder and adjusted the microphone. The small sound of it squeaking echoed louder than it should have. A hush fell over the room, not complete silence, but enough to make her heartbeat sound like a drum. In her ears, in that pause, all her doubts came rushing back. What if her voice cracked? What if she forgot the lyrics? What if she played one wrong chord and they all started whispering, then laughing? Her throat felt dry. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Somewhere near the front, she thought she saw a teacher give her an encouraging nod. She gripped the neck of her guitar tighter, her knuckles pale under the strain. The first strum came out shaky. It wasn't wrong, but it wasn't perfect either. She swallowed hard and began the second chord, her fingers trembling slightly. The crowd was still waiting, expecting. Measuring her in those first few seconds, her voice came next, soft and hesitant. The first line of her song floated out into the hall, barely louder than a whisper, somewhere in the middle of the first verse. She caught sight of a few people leaning forward in their seats. It was a small thing, but it helped her breathe a little easier. She focused on the strings beneath her fingers, letting the familiar movements guide her. The song was one she had written alone, late at night, about feeling unseen and unheard. Every word came from the part of her heart she had never let anyone touch. By the second verse, her voice was stronger. It wasn't that the fear disappeared, it was still there, gripping her chest, but she had found something else to hold on to. The melody wrapped around her like a shield. She could feel the room changing, the restless shifting of the audience fading into stillness. A strange kind of connection began to grow between her and those unseen faces. Then, just as she reached the chorus, something unexpected happened. The string she had replaced weeks ago slipped slightly. It didn't snap, but the sound was off. Her chest tightened, panic sparking in her veins. She hesitated for the briefest second, but instead of stopping, she leaned into the chord, adjusting her fingers in a way that kept the rhythm going. If anyone noticed, they didn't show it. That moment became a turning point. She realized that mistakes didn't have to destroy everything. The song wasn't about perfection, it was about honesty. She kept going, her voice carrying more emotion now than fear. By the bridge, the words were pouring out of her like a confession she had held in for years. The final chorus rose higher than she had planned. It was raw, unpolished, but real. When the last note hung in the air, there was a second of silence. Her fingers were still resting on the strings, her breathing uneven. She couldn't tell if they were silent because they were unimpressed or because they were caught in the moment. Then, the applause began. At first it was scattered, one person clapping here, another there, but then it grew. The sound rolled through the hall like a wave. She felt it in her chest, her skin, her bones. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was genuine. People were smiling, some standing, some cheering. For the first time in her life, she was not invisible. Her knees felt weak as she stepped back from the microphone. She gave a small nod.
Out.
Not trusting herself to speak, the lights felt warmer now, almost gentle, as she walked off the stage. She realized her hands were no longer shaking. The fear hadn't vanished, it had transformed into something else, something she had never felt before. The belief that maybe, just maybe, she belonged in the light backstage. One of the organizers handed her a bottle of water. "That was beautiful," they said simply. She muttered a quiet thank you. Still trying to process what had just happened, the sound of the applause still echoed in her ears. She knew that no matter what happened next, whether she won or not, the moment would stay with her forever. Little did she know, the night wasn't over. Before the talent show ended, someone from the audience would come looking for her, and what they had to say would change her path even more than the applause had. A song that touched every heart. She could still hear the applause in her head, long after stepping off the stage. Backstage, the other performers were busy preparing for their turns, some adjusting costumes, others checking props, but she sat quietly. In a corner, her guitar resting on her lap, feeling like she had just stepped out of a dream. It didn't feel real, the lights, the faces in the crowd, the sound of hands coming together just for her. The next act had already started, but part of the audience was still talking about her. She didn't know it yet, but her song had done more than just fill the air. It had reached into people's memories and hearts. It reminded some of being young and invisible. It reminded others of moments they had lost hope for a few. It simply made them stop and listen in a world that rarely slows down. Among the audience was an older man with silver hair sitting in the middle row. He had come to watch his granddaughter perform. But when she sang, he found himself leaning forward, drawn into her words. By the time she finished, his eyes were moist. He didn't know who she was, but he knew he wanted to speak to her before the night ended when the talent show wrapped up. The students gathered on stage for the announcement of winners. She didn't expect her name to be called honestly. She didn't care about winning. Anymore, she had already felt something far greater than a trophy being heard. As the host read out the results, she clapped politely for each winner. She was about to step down when she felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning, she saw the older man from the audience, up close. His eyes were kind but sharp. The type that noticed details others missed. That was your own song, wasn't it? He asked. She nodded slowly, unsure what to say. It's rare to hear something so honest. Said, it's not just music, it's a piece of you. Don't stop sharing it. Right. She opened her mouth to reply, but found herself speechless. No one had ever told her something like that before. On the way home, she walked slower than usual, the cool night air calming her racing thoughts. Streetlights cast pools of golden light along the sidewalk. Her guitar case felt lighter in her hand every time she replayed the performance in her mind. She noticed something new, the way the audience leaned in, the stillness in the hall, the warmth in their applause. For the first time, she thought maybe her music wasn't meant to stay hidden. The next morning at school, everything felt different. People who had never spoken to her before smiled and greeted her. A group of girls from another class stopped her in the hallway just to say how much they loved her song. Even the math teacher, who rarely showed emotion, told her quietly, "You have a gift, you should use it." It was strange and overwhelming, but in a good way. She had been invisible for so long that the sudden attention felt almost unreal. At lunch, she found herself sitting with students she didn't know well. They asked about her music, how long she'd been playing, if she wrote all her songs, when she would perform again. She didn't have all the answers, but for once, she didn't feel out of place. Her guitar wasn't just an old instrument anymore. It was the bridge between her and the world. That afternoon, she went home and opened the box under her bed, where she kept her cassette recordings. She listened to them one by one, her voice from months ago sounding smaller, less certain. She realized how much she had grown without even noticing. The girl who had recorded those tapes had been afraid to be heard. The girl listening to them now was beginning to understand the power of being heard. Her younger brother peeked into her room. "You were really good last night," he said simply, before wandering off. It was such a small thing, but it made her smile. If even he had noticed, maybe she was finally breaking through the walls she had built around herself. That evening, she sat by her window again, the city, lights flickering in the distance. She picked up her guitar and started playing the same song she had sung on stage. This time, she imagined all those faces in the crowd, the way they had leaned in and listened. She realized something: her music wasn't just hers anymore. Now belonged to everyone who had felt what she felt, everyone who had been invisible. At some point, from that night on, she promised herself she would keep writing, keep playing, and most importantly, keep sharing. The fear was still there, somewhere deep inside. But now it was joined by something stronger: hope. The applause that shook her soul, the sound of applause, was something she thought she understood. Before that night, it had only been background noise, something people gave at the end of a performance out of politeness. But what she had heard on that stage wasn't polite. It was loud, warm, and alive. It had weight to it, as if the sound was wrapping around her, lifting her up in a way she had never felt before. All through the weekend, she carried that sound with her. It followed her in the kitchen while she helped her mother peel vegetables, hummed in her ears while she hung laundry out to dry. Even as she lay in bed, it came back to her in waves: the clapping, the cheering, the way the room had felt like it was breathing with her every time she replayed it in her head. She felt the same rush of warmth in her chest. For years, she had convinced herself that she didn't need to be noticed, that blending into the background was safer, easier. But that applause had shown her something she couldn't ignore. Being seen wasn't just about ego, it was about connection. It was proof that, for a few minutes, her voice had reached people in a way that mattered. On Monday morning, she stepped into school, expecting the usual routine. Instead, she found her name written in chalk on the notice board: Best Original Song, Talent Show. Students were stopping to read it. Some smiled at her. Others gave her a nod of respect. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. It made her cheeks warm, but it also made her walk a little taller during lunch. One of the younger students shyly approached her. "Your song? It made me feel like you were talking about me, they said. It was a simple sentence, but it struck her deeply. She realized that applause wasn't just about noise, it was about the silent stories people carried inside them. Her song had reached into those stories and given them a voice. That afternoon, a teacher asked her to come to the music room. When she arrived, she found the same older man from the audience waiting there with the teacher. He introduced himself as a retired music teacher who now volunteered at community events. "I've seen a lot of performances," he told her, "but yours, it wasn't about showing off. It was about telling the truth. That's what people remember." He then offered her something she never expected, an invitation to perform at a small local gathering the following month. Her first reaction was fear. The stage still felt too big in her mind. But he smiled knowingly. "You've already done the hard part, letting people hear you. Now it's just about letting more people hear you." That night, she sat in her room with her guitar on her lap. She thought about that invitation. Part of her wanted to say no and retreat into the comfort of her small, safe world, but then she remembered the applause. The way it had shaken her to her core, the way it had made her feel alive in a way nothing else had. She began to play again, her fingers finding the chords without thinking. She sang softly at first, then louder. Her voice filled the room. The applause in her memory blended with the music in her present. And in that moment, she made a quiet decision. She would perform again. The following week, she started working on new songs. She wrote about her town, about the people she saw every day but never spoke to. She wrote about her own fears and hopes. Each song felt like a letter she was writing to someone she hadn't met yet, someone who might hear it and think, "That's exactly how I feel." Her younger brother noticed the change in her. "You're playing more these days," said one evening. She smiled. "I guess I am." He didn't know it, but those words meant everything. It meant someone in her own home had started noticing her too. The night before the community event, she stood in front of her mirror holding the guitar. She practiced smiling, practiced breathing, practiced imagining the faces of strangers who would soon be her audience. And every time doubt tried to creep in, she drowned it out with the memory of that first applause. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a promise. A reminder that when she stepped on stage, no matter how scared she felt, there were people ready to listen. Little did she know, the next performance would bring an even bigger crowd, and in that crowd would be someone who could open doors she had never even dreamed existed. A new beginning. The night of the community event arrived faster than she expected. It was held in a small town hall, a place she had passed many times but never entered. From the outside, it looked ordinary: brick walls, glass doors, a faded sign above the entrance, but inside, it was warm and welcoming. The stage was smaller than the school's, but the audience felt bigger. Rows of chairs were already filled with people of all ages. Some she recognized from the neighborhood, others were complete strangers. She sat backstage with her guitar. Trying to steady her breathing, her hands trembled. Not from cold, but from the weight of the moment. She had told herself this wasn't as big as the school talent show. But in truth, it felt bigger. This time, no one knew her at all. She was just another name on the program. If they didn't like her song, they would forget her before the night was over. The retired music teacher who had invited her stepped up beside her. "You've got this," he said quietly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Then she heard her name being called over the speakers. The sound was like a spark in her chest, forcing her to move as she walked onto the stage. The lights warmed her skin. The murmur of the audience softened. She adjusted the microphone and glanced at the faces in front of her. Some looked curious, some distracted, a few already smiling. She told herself it didn't matter. She wasn't here to impress everyone. She was here to reach the ones who were willing to listen. The first strum was gentle, almost cautious. The song she chose was near-written, only a week ago, about finding courage in unexpected places. Her voice wavered in the first line, but steadied as the melody unfolded. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the lyrics guide her. She sang as if she was telling a story to someone sitting right in front of her. By the time she reached the chorus, the room had gone still. She opened her eyes and saw people leaning forward. One woman in the front row was holding her chest. As if the words had reached somewhere deep, a man in the back was recording on his phone. She didn't think about the guitar anymore. It was just part of her hands. Part of the story. Every note felt like it was leaving a mark in the air. When the last line faded, she lowered her head slightly, unsure what would happen, for a heartbeat. There was silence. Then the applause came strong, steady, and growing louder. It wasn't the same as the first time. This applause felt like recognition, like people were saying, "We see you." She stepped off the stage, her cheeks warm and her heart pounding. Backstage, the retired teacher was grinning. "See?" he said. "You were meant to do this." Before she could reply, a woman approached. She introduced herself as a coordinator for a local arts festival. "I don't know where you've been hiding," she said with a smile, "but we need you to perform at our event next month. It's bigger, a lot more people, but I think you'll be ready." The words hit her like a wave. Part of her wanted to say no. Immediately more people meant more pressure, more fear, but the applause was still ringing in her ears. She realized she didn't want to go back to being invisible. She wanted to see where this could go. So she nodded. "I'll do it." The following weeks were unlike anything she had known. She practiced every day, writing new songs and refining the old ones. She learned how to control her breathing, how to let her voice carry without forcing it. Her younger brother began sitting in the doorway while she practiced, sometimes humming. Along her parents started noticing too, asking when her next performance was. It was strange to think that the girl who once went unnoticed was now being asked about her music almost daily. The night before the festival, she couldn't sleep. She sat by her window with the guitar in her lap, watching the quiet streets below. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the years of singing alone in her room. The fear of being seen, the trembling on that first stage, and then she thought about the moments that had changed her, the applause. The kind words from strangers, the invitations to play again. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was moving toward something. It's not just existing, she whispered to herself. This is just the beginning, and deep down, she believed. It remembered forever. The morning of the festival was bright and warm. The streets buzzed with activity as vendors set up stalls. Children ran between them, and music from early sound checks floated through the air. She arrived at the venue with her guitar case in one hand and a quiet determination in her heart. It was the largest event she had ever been part of. Hundreds of people were already gathered, and more kept arriving. Backstage, the noise from the crowd felt like a distant roar. She could hear the performers before her, energetic bands, dancers, singers with booming voices. When she peeked out from the side curtain, she saw a sea of faces. The thought made her stomach twist. But she reminded herself of every step that had brought her here. This wasn't the invisible girl walking into school. This was the girl who had learned to be heard when her name was announced. The applause was polite but curious. Most people didn't know her yet. She stepped into the light, her fingers brushing against the smooth wood of her guitar as if it were an old friend. She took a slow breath and let the moment settle before playing the first chord. The song she had chosen wasn't about being invisible anymore. It was about finding light after living in the shadows. Her voice began soft, drawing people closer, then rose with each verse. The melody was simple but full of emotion. Halfway through, she saw something remarkable. The crowd was silent, not because they were bored, but because they were listening, really listening. She sang, like she was speaking to each person individually, to the woman in the front row wiping her eyes, to the young boy holding his father's hand, to the older couple swaying gently to the rhythm. By the time she reached the final chorus, the space between her and the audience felt almost non-existent, as if they were breathing in time with her voice. The last note hung in the air, and for a heartbeat, there was stillness. Then the applause came, not just loud but overwhelming. It rolled over her in waves, stronger than anything she had felt before. Some people were standing, others whistling, many smiling through tears. The sound filled her with a warmth so deep it was almost impossible to put into words. She stepped back, gave a small bow, and felt her hands tremble, not from fear, but from gratitude. As she walked off stage, several people stopped her to say how much the song meant to them. One woman hugged her, whispering, "That song, it's my story too." In that moment, She understood something: music wasn't just about sharing your voice, it was about helping others find theirs. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the festival lights glowed softly, the retired music teacher found her. "You've done more than perform today," he said. "You've made them remember you." She smiled, her heart swelling. She knew he was right. Something about tonight felt permanent, even if she never saw some of those people again. They would carry a piece of her music with them, back home. She placed her guitar in its case and sat by the window. The town was quiet now, the distant hum of the festival fading into the night. She thought about the girl she had been, the one who walked through crowded streets unseen, who sang only to cracked walls and moonlight. That girl still lived inside her. But now she was joined by someone new, someone unafraid to step forward and be heard. In the weeks that followed, invitations began to arrive: small gigs, open mics, even a radio interview. Her life was still simple, but it was no longer small. Every stage she stepped onto felt like a continuation of that first moment when the world turned its head and finally saw her. Years later, people in her town still remembered the girl who sang at the festival. They remembered the voice that had stopped them in their tracks. And somewhere, in homes she had never visited, her songs played quietly in the background, comforting someone, inspiring someone, reminding someone they weren't alone. She had once feared she would live and die unnoticed, but now she understood. You speak from the heart. When you dare to be heard, you never really disappear. Her music had given her a place in the world, and in the hearts of those who had listened, she would be remembered forever.